Hey everybody, before we get the video started and I talk about the whole creative process behind it, if you want a copy of the edited film version, go down below in the Google Drive link and click on it and download it so you can keep it for yourself. Hello everybody, today is something a little bit different. I'm still talking about media, but not video games. And for my many new subs who followed because of my recent political content, don't worry, I have plans for a political video soon that will blow you away, I hope. But stick around for this one because I've been on a bit of a weird kick lately. See, I decided, you can probably tell by the title of the video, to edit the 6-ish hour Disney Plus Obi-Wan Kenobi series into a 2-hour film. And it was a bit of a journey, honestly. Not just because of the logistics of editing a show into a film, but because as I picked it apart, it got me thinking a lot about media, nostalgia, escapism, and how much the stories we all love belong to us versus the corporations that might technically own the IP. I hope this is a fun, insightful video, and I'd like to start with my own personal history with Star Wars. See, I had the idea for this from a random comment I came across on YouTube. And I had just finished working on my last video saying I wanted something a little bit lighter to do in between other video projects. But as I dug into it, it really made me reflect on Star Wars and what it's meant to me, similar to the first of the Respawn Jedi games. See, I grew up in the perfect time to be a fan of the prequel trilogy. Episode 1 came out in 1999, I was 4 years old. One of my first memories ever was having a episode 1 themed birthday party. Legos, something that I am a huge lifelong, to this day I still build Legos. The very first Lego set I had was a New Hope land speeder. It's been with me a long time, all the way through the prequel trilogy, which of course I watched over and over like plenty of other kids out there. But the thing that really, I think, cemented my love of Star Wars would be my aunt, who gave me a lot of books to read. The Legacy of the Force, Young Jedi Academy, a lot of the Karen Travis and Drew Kapetian books. I didn't have a lot of video games, I didn't have any internet growing up, so I loved reading. I was incredibly into reading the whole time. I was going through middle school all the way to high school, and I think high school reading awful books in English class really made me drop that. But until that, I was really into Star Wars in particular. Like there were points where I would go through in middle school some of those 800-page Star Wars books in like a day or two. Like I was so invested in that world and story. The thing is that much like Marvel to me, Star Wars is always going to be special. Not because of anything from the last like 10 years, but because it was a mythology I really grew up with and experienced in a lot more creative ways than we have now. Case in point, when I say creativity, I mean the prequels, which say what you want, and I see more flaws every time I watch them, but there's a creativity, a true cohesive creative vision, a color and a texture that you just do not see with modern blockbusters in the prequels, Star Wars included. These weird, bizarre creative choices that you'd never get from focus-tested blockbusters with reshoots and nostalgia bait. And to be fair, you do still have some similar directors who do go with their gut in franchise films, for better and worse. I think James Gunn is a great example. But you don't get that level that you did with the prequels. So when Disney announced new Star Wars in 2015, I was all over it. And the movies came out, and Solo, and Rise of Skywalker, and 10,000 TV shows. And it's been weird seeing these worlds I grew up loving, be incorporated into this never-ending churn of content. Thankfully, I'll never have to worry about that with some of my other favorite franchises like Tron and the Chronicles of Riddick. And that's not to say all of the Star Wars or Marvel shows are bad. I know a lot of people like to poo-poo them and will go keep honking off on their 5-star A23 letterbox playlist, but I've enjoyed a fair amount of them. There's some good storytelling, creativity, some memorable characters, but you can see the restraints of making something for such a wide mainstream audience under a massive corporation like Disney. I think a really great example, a frustratingly good example, is The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which comes so annoyingly close to making a worthwhile political statement, but fight scenes, you know. I think The Mandalorian, going back to Star Wars, is another really great example. The first season, you feel the electricity on the screen. as Jon Favreau goes back to the basics of the Lucas formula, which is just samurai tropes in a space western setting. Like, it's back to basics, and it was so rad. It was this weird Yojimbo meets Lone Wolf and Cub, and it was so refreshing with new characters and no Jedi. But now, 2 seasons later, it's tied to 2 other shows and has 1,000 cameos that you need to watch 2 animated series to understand. And I don't have time for that. Now, you might hear this and think my media diet is just superhero flicks and big franchises, but nah. I have a massive variety of intake. For example, there was a 2-month period a little while ago where I just read through a bunch of classic literature for the first time. Like, I read The Invisible Man, Frankenstein, which is incredible, if you haven't read it. Moby Dick, Crime and Punishment, The Picture of Dorian Gray, a whole bunch of other stuff. And I just picked up a reread of the Marvel Ultimate Universe, the entire thing, which I started last year and then dropped for a while. So I kind of just move in cycles, whatever is striking my hyperfixation at that moment. I think so many people on the internet have this weird holier than thou view of media consumption where they don't watch superhero movies, they only watch art house films. But you can do both, and there's good and bad stuff in both. Like, there are bad A24 movies, there are bad art house films, there are bad superhero movies. And I think it's stupid to just limit yourself to one kind of content. As an example, I've been showing my partner a bunch of movies that they've never seen, and it's a lot of my classics and favorites like Alien and Aliens and Terminator 2. But then when I'm not showing those like big blockbuster action movies, I watched The Seventh Seal for the first time, which is a incredible Ingmar Bergman film. If you haven't seen it, you should. It's on HBO Max, or I guess just Max now. I'll get to the streaming stuff in a bit, I promise. Sorry, I'm getting off on a little bit of a tangent. So why would I take time to edit this series, which by all accounts was pretty mid, like it was pretty middling, into a film? Why would I take like 30 plus hours of time to do this? Well, it's because I have a real passion for stories. If you couldn't tell by my YouTube channel, by the things that I've done, things that I've made, I think so many people have this idea of what they wanted the story of Obi-Wan to be, and when it came out, a lot of people were disappointed, which is common in fandoms, but here it wasn't because of any subversion or expectations like The Last Jedi. It was because it was just, People wanted this taut, dark story of Obi-Wan dealing with his PTSD, and that story is here for about 2 hours. The other 3 to 4 hours is just padding, dealing with side characters that come and go, characters I can't even remember the name of, and I've seen the show like 4 or 5 times now, including like twice in movie form. Infamously, this series was meant to be a film before it was expanded into a full series order following the initial success of The Mandalorian. Now, it never needed that, and the final product really shows it. Which brings me back to why would I personally do such a crazy thing? Well, it wasn't for like a big stunt, though I am sharing it with people who want to see it. It was because these characters, specifically Obi-Wan and Anakin, and their stories meant a lot to me growing up. And getting to see Hayden Christensen as Vader, Ewan McGregor back in the saddle as Obi-Wan, it had me excited. I don't watch almost any shows until after the window of excitement has died down. I haven't even watched Andor, even though I've heard great things about it. Haven't watched Mandalorian Season 3. Again, I'm a big Star Wars fan, or I at least would call myself one. I certainly grew up that way. But I do not feel a slavish devotion to just consuming whatever content Disney puts out. However, for Kenobi, I watched this series each episode as it dropped. And I saw a lot of good. Where others were arguing about Leia or Reva, I saw like 2 really good, well-acted characters. Where some people were pissy about breaking canon, I was really engaged with the performances from Hayden, Ewan McGregor, and Moses Ingram. But a lot of these moments of redemption, for me personally, felt buried under padding, and though I looked fondly at the spaces that were few and far between, all of the extra fluff kept me from revisiting Obi-Wan in the same way I could just go back to something like Rogue One or The Last Jedi. So I decided to do something about it. Here's my big mistake. I'm not the most technically accomplished or able person. If I was better at this, I'd probably have just ripped the file and the footage straight from a Blu-ray but instead I did the dumb thing and just recorded it all from Disney Plus. As a result, the final footage has artifacting, there are minor sound glitches, there are minor video glitches, and then after exporting it, re-exporting it, and then compiling it into one film, because I couldn't do it all at once on my computer, the final version, no matter how I export it, also has a lot of artifacting, which is fine because it looks okay on a small screen, but when you blow it up on a big screen, especially in the darker scenes. See, the daylight scenes, totally fine. Like, for the most part, they play totally HD. However, whatever happened with aliasing and the capture of the aliased footage on the darker scenes, which there are a lot of because this series is desaturated to shit, makes it look really rough. I feel like someday I may go through and re-edit over the old footage with higher quality footage, keeping the same audio tracks I cobbled together, but for now, this is, it was just meant to be a fun fan project. I'm not looking for the highest quality picture. It's just a bummer that I didn't get it. But aside from the mistakes I made recording the show, once I had it, I need to figure out how to make it watchable. I started out with a loose standard of cutting around the 6 episodes into 20 minutes a piece, give or take. This was easier for some episodes than others, like episode 5 and 4, which had just a lot of padding and back and forth fetch questing, versus episodes, say, 1 and 6, which had a lot of important character moments, setup, and development. Now, if you watch my movie cut, you'll notice I cut a lot out of the intro. In fact, I changed the intro all around. I chopped and duct taped it so that the Order 66 sequence at the beginning actually goes into footage from Revenge of the Sith, which I desaturated to match the color palette of the show, and then that's Obi-Wan's nightmare, which opened the show. I used that bit of lingering silence after he wakes up for a title card, and from there he's watching Luke, and pretty soon after we go to Leia on Alderaan. It's a much quicker, and arguably maybe too quick for like an actual theatrical release, but I feel like it gets to the point faster. See, one of the problems with the show, and it reared its head very quickly, was that there was a lot of showing what Obi-Wan was doing, but not really what he was feeling. And it's a very emotionally driven story. Ian McGregor does a great job with the feelings, but it's not front and center. With this movie cut, I wanted to change that. Instead of a contextless Order 66 scene that doesn't pay off until episode 5, and then a time skip, we get right into Obi-Wan's nightmares and his mental state in this dark cave, a cave that also plays an important symbolic role in the end of the show when, spoilers, Obi-Wan is quite literally ready to move on from his trauma and leaves the cave. Oh, hello, cat. I have a cat. Oh, you look so grumpy. You look so grumps. Who's grumps? Who's grumps? Now, the cave stuff is very basic symbolism, but a lot of the symbolism of the show gets lost in the padding, so I tried to just focus on it as much as possible to help illustrate the character's journey. See, the thing about editing is that it's the real magic behind movie making. You can have a great shot, some great acting, but if it's not well edited, it won't land. I don't know how well I did here. This is my first time trying to construct a cohesive narrative. But I set out after this first scene with a mandate to focus on Obi-Wan's internal struggles. He's paranoid, troubled, afraid of his past, something that does get lost in the rest of the show with its varied subplots and fetch quests. A big theme of the story is that you don't need to let the past define you, so it was incredibly important to keep all the stuff showing how much Obi-Wan was haunted by Anakin and the fall of the Jedi, as he realizes that there are other people out there who were affected by the rise of the Empire who still keeps fighting, and he can too. And honestly, that kind of ties this project to a lot of my other work here, and has made it hit a little bit closer to home. Going through it and really dissecting everything with a fine comb really brought home how much potential this story had. Now, you can cut a lot of side plots and characters, but you still need a full narrative. You can't just have a collection of highlight reels. So I couldn't just cut Leia or Reva because they were important, but I can alter their stories and what information the audience gets. For example, Reva has an entirely introduction in this cut. Instead of the beginning scene where the Inquisitors are chasing a Jedi, she shows up during the scene and harasses Owen. Now, in the show, we see the Inquisitors learn all about them through some not great expository dialogue. But in this new cut, you learn about the Inquisitors from a Jawa and see Obi-Wan's concern. This creates intrigue. And when they show up, it would logically follow that Obi-Wan thinks they're worried about finding him, until it's shown they're looking for another Jedi. The other Jedi also basically cut out, except for this and one other scene. So there's a lot of stuff like this. This moment still characterizes Reva. I cut out a lot of the fluff that makes her seem insecure and like she's being insubordinate or seeking attention. And the result is a thinner narrative that Moses Ingram comes across as a lean, mean, brutal killing machine. More than any of the other Inquisitors, she feels like a real follower of Vader, and I think that also helps dramatically flesh out her arc in the story. Leia is another story. She needs moments of character at the beginning of the show that shows she's clever, independent, and thoughtful. These moments on Alderaan are really good, but she also gets a lot of time to develop these traits throughout the entire show. So a lot of non-essential stuff here and later is completely chopped, including a chase sequence. Because a TV show can't rely on consecutive viewership, there are some things that it repeatedly goes out of its way to illustrate to the viewer, like Ben constantly talking about how much Leia reminds him of Padme, to, draw parallels between his friend and her daughter. But we only need that once, so I just kept the one in episode 2. And this is where the real challenge came. I had to cut as much as possible, to the bone, but it still needed to have pacing that worked, which means you need things like scene transitions, non-jarring musical transitions, footage that properly lines up with what you're seeing. This is much easier to do when you're writing a movie or shooting a movie, but when the footage is just there, you gotta make do. For example, I had to cut a lot of the episode 5 lightsaber fight between a young Anakin and Obi-Wan, which sucks because I love the scene, but there was no way to redistribute the whole thing throughout the movie while keeping the flow. And I did keep some parts in which I thought were important to the parallels in the story, but I still don't think it flows particularly well. But that's what you get when you're editing a TV show. I did my best with what I think I had. There are some moments of editing where I use character voiceover to exposit while you're watching something else, which helps some scenes move along. There's a lot of sound bridges, which for non-movie people is when you hear a scene before you see it, so it helps bring you in to the establishing shot without being too jarring. Establishing shots being another thing I had to reorganize and work with. For example, I used random Tatooine footage from episode 6 for episode 1 to pad out an establishing moment. It's all these little things that you don't necessarily think of when you watch movies that makes them a cohesive experience. I also took Obi-Wan's nightmare sequence from the beginning and sprinkled some pieces throughout. For example, when Reva informs Ben that Anakin is still alive, I think it gives him a more literal look into the panic that Obi-Wan is experiencing in that moment, as opposed to just zooming in on a fairly blank expression. But I had to do a lot more than sound bridges. I had to do real audio work to make some of my cuts work. For example, here's a scene where I faded in a droid sound to make it sound like it was rapidly approaching. It's a short scene, but look at how much was cut, just including this versus the original.
Who were they?
Inquisitors. Many were Jedi who turned to the dark side. Now they hunt their own kind.
And this is all for you?
Listen carefully. The entire city's locked down.
Identification ready for scan.
Who were they?
Inquisitors. Many were Jedi who turned to the dark side. Now they hunt their own kind.
And this is all for you? Who are you?
The bounty is on me. Let her go.
Listen carefully. The entire city's locked down. It's done. You need another exit.
And it's just a few seconds, but it can make all the difference. And speaking of audio, I may have outdone myself with the music a little bit. See, John Williams technically did the Obi-Wan theme, but most of the music throughout wasn't John Williams, and I found it kind of lacking. There's no way I could redub every scene, but if I could do a few, throw in a few classic themes and homages and motifs here, I would be pretty happy. And it mostly works. There are some rough transitions, but Vader's theme plays more than just one little refrain at the end. I also had a bit of self-indulgence where I put the classic Skywalker theme swell during an emotional moment, and I think it helps it lands better than the much more quiet theme that was originally there. Some other sound work I did, with Vader also probably wouldn't have gone on Disney Plus, like a gut-wrenching scream heard by the mother in episode 3. Keep an eye out for that. But then came the big enchiladas, the dream I was working towards. The lightsaber fights. See, from the beginning, I knew I wanted the Revenge of the Sith, Battle of Heroes, and Anakin versus Obi-Wan themes. See, what I saw as one of the big themes of the show was Anakin and Obi-Wan's relationship, and more importantly, Obi-Wan coming to terms with Anakin's failure not being his failure. So it only makes sense to have these themes that were seen the first time they fought on Mustafar. I think these themes bring these scenes up a lot, and for fans, help draw parallels between the denial of Obi-Wan in Revenge of the Sith, where he says, "You were supposed to be the chosen one," and the acceptance he finds in the show, where he literally says, "Then I guess my friend is dead." I then played Anakin's Dark Deeds as a huge part, another Revenge of the Sith callback to the scene where Anakin completes his transformation to Darth Vader, but this time it plays as Obi-Wan realizes that Anakin is gone forever to Vader. See, I'm working with parallels here. It's almost like
again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
I also threw in the Vader hallway theme from Rogue One because it whips and makes for a more compelling and horrifying moment when Vader is surrounded by fire. But some concessions had to be made, as I couldn't cut the audio out entirely, but couldn't get clean vocals, so you can still hear background music and noise sometimes. But whatever, this is a fan project, like I said. When Disney starts paying me, then you can bitch about it. A lot has been made about how the show breaks the canon of Episode 4, but I don't think it really does. To me, it makes more sense now that Obi-Wan meets Vader with the cold calculation he has in New Hope, versus their last meeting being in Revenge of the Sith. And this music is a big part of drawing those parallels and I think helping define those moments, along with just focusing more on the scenes themselves without as much fluff distracting the viewers, but whatever, nerd shit, right? All this music meant that these scenes needed to be redubbed. So I literally poured through hundreds of lightsaber sounds and weapon sounds effects from a Star Wars library, pulling almost entirely from the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy, which I think kind of matches the tone of this show and where it fits in the overall universe. And look, I don't mean to toot my own horn, because I think it's still a little bit janky in spots, but when you put some John Williams in here, these fight scenes sing like they were always meant to be there.
Have you come to destroy me, Obi-Wan?
I will do what I must.
There are plenty of other small edits I did here and there, some clever scenes where I reversed footage or played it backwards for only a second and it shockingly works. It's so fun and cool to do, and when it pays off, and I didn't even remember I did it when I watched it back. All told, this was not a small effort at all. I really wanted to deliver a proper Star Wars-like experience that preserves the world building and characters I enjoyed from the show, imbued it with a little bit more cinematic class and flair, and jettison the rest of the boring stuff. Now, does it work? Well, ironically, for a project based mostly in my nostalgia for old media, a big theme of Kenobi is not letting your past define you. As a film, I think there are some rousing emotional moments. The pacing works infinitely better without the padding, and the mix of new and old sound effects and music makes for a more authentic Star Wars feeling. It's always going to bear the scars and mild inconsistencies from being a TV show. Like, you're never gonna mistake this for a theatrical release. Sorry. But if you've been curious about this story and didn't want to chunk out 6 hours, this seems to be a good alternative. Mileage on the final product will probably vary, but I like it. I mean, of course I did. I made it. And there's some stuff in here I don't think necessarily works very well, but I love it. I added a brief PTSD flashback when Obi-Wan sees a clone trooper. Totally unnecessary, kind of cringe, but I dig it. And to me, that's the George Lucas magic, which is part of why I did this. And as I got into it more, part of why I kept going. I've waxed poetic about the spirit of creativity and inspiration in Star Wars before in my Jedi Fallen Order video, which you can watch on my channel, and I'll leave a link down below. But it feels different to really dig into something and try and make it your own, to let your own influences work with what others have done, both in terms of Star Wars as a property and the work as a TV show. There are moments where I play up the horror of Vader, where the editing lingers on emotions and facial expressions, where the music swells to help cement emotional moments. And these are all made of pieces of somebody else's work, but it's been reconstituted in my style, while still trying to stay within the parameters of a follow-up to Lucas's prequel trilogy. And it's honestly not too different from people who write fan fiction, which is something I've never done. You're still playing in the characters and worlds and imaginations of others, but bringing your own flavor to the table. And as I kept working in editing, I had this realization that this show never needed to be made. Someone at Disney looked at a spreadsheet and said, turn that project into more content for the Disney Plus grinder, which is happening more and more. We are all served an endless sludge of never-ending content to consume, and it all seems to blend together after a while. But here's the thing, just because content's been stretched thin, or it might be coasting on fan service, that doesn't mean there's not something to enjoy or dissect or worthwhile artistry behind it. The people who made this show, from the directors to the cast who acted the hell out of it, to the artists who worked on the sets and CGI, there's a lot of passion here. And one of the main reasons I wanted to trim the fat was to showcase what I enjoyed about the show to others, to share the version of the story I experienced with people who were just like me, tired of the slog of content. Unfortunately, we are looking into an era where the artistry of said content matters less and less, as Disney Plus and Hulu and HBO and other streaming services fill their servers with a never-ending series of 2-season shows that they hope will go viral and apparently remove if they don't. It's important to remember that stories matter. Not the toys, not the IP, or who owns it, but who's telling these stories and what they have to say. Because, look, we're probably gonna get more Star Wars and Marvel for the rest of our lives. But whether we're drawn to them because of nostalgia and we love them as kids, or because they're telling great stories that break new ground for the universe, like Andor, they deserve to be remembered and passed down and reinterpreted. As I've taken hold of this story and reshaped it and cut what didn't work, there comes a clarity with what it's really about. And as I mentioned before, I find this show and this film to be about not letting your past define you, which is something that I know personally I identify with as a message, and I know a lot of other people do too. So I guess my big hope, like I mentioned previously, is that if I cut all the fluff, people will find the same value in this art that I did, regardless of if it's an art house movie or Star Wars. Stories mean a lot to people, and I think we should do what we can to make them our own and also share that passion with others, because it's a hard time in the world right now, and stories can really help us get through it sometimes. I think that's pretty much it. That sums up this dumb project thing I did and why I did it. Thank you very much for watching. This is my first on-camera video where I'm sitting at my desk. Let me know what you think of that. I've done a couple other on-camera things before. As always, I appreciate you so much for watching. If you do end up watching the movie cut, let me know. And then check out my Jedi Fallen Order video essay, and please, especially if you're here from the Thought Slam Eyeball Zone, stay tuned, because my next political video for Pride Month, I am hoping to do really good things with. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for watching, and be sure to, of course, you'll see patrons' names right here. Be sure to go and give some money to my Patreon so I can keep doing weird things like this and sharing it with all of you. Have a great rest of your day, and may the Force be with you.